In 1974, a US military helicopter crashed in Allied territory in the middle of a safe zone, more than 300 kilometers from the border of any active threat. The case was never reported. The wreckage was removed less than 3 hours later, and the cargo on board. Nobody in any official report even mentioned what it was, but those who were there that morning say that what they found in the wreckage shouldn't exist. The helicopter left at 4:12 a.m. from a temporary American base set up south of West Germany. It was a CH-47 Chinook, a model used for heavy transport. 4 men were on board, according to the boarding sheet. But strangely, the flight was not on the official schedule for the day. No other base commander had been informed of the takeoff, and the route plan was delivered to the tower an hour beforehand in a sealed envelope. The pilot, Lieutenant James M. Frowley, was a veteran of the Vietnam War and not used to participating in operations outside protocol. He was known for his precision and discipline. That's why, when he took command of the helicopter that early morning, several operators found it strange but didn't question it. The orders came straight from the high command with a red stamp and the signature of someone nobody recognized. In the field, this meant only one thing: a matter above access level. What was most striking about that day's records was an almost forgotten detail. On the aircraft's record in the cargo type field, there was a single handwritten letter in blue ink, Phi Theta. No known code used that symbol, and no one in the tower could explain why the record was filled in like that. At the time, it seemed like just another administrative error, but 2 hours later, it no longer looked like a mistake. The helicopter's route passed over an area considered absolutely safe. Low forests, few villages, no troop movements or exercises in progress. It was the kind of mission that didn't even require an air escort. Even so, at 5:26 a.m., the tower lost contact with the Chinook. There was no mayday, no interference, no attempt at emergency contact. 1 minute everything was stable. The next minute the helicopter disappeared from the radar. The tower activated the standard communication failure protocol. The hypothesis was simple: signal drop due to transponder failure. But something didn't add up. The last location point indicated a stable altitude and constant speed. There was no storm or weather anomaly. It was as if the helicopter had switched off in mid-air. At 5:39 a.m., a small village 12 kilometers from the route reported a muffled bang coming from the forest. There was no fire. There was no light, just the dull sound of impact, and then silence. When the response team arrived at the base, they received direct orders to mobilize immediately. With no time to prepare documentation or check maps, the Alpha 9 platoon was told to move in. Full equipment, full perimeter isolation, no questions. That last sentence, according to one of the soldiers, was said without any emphasis, almost like a casual warning. But it was enough to put everyone on alert. Because in 1974, in safe territory, nobody wore a containment mask, unless they knew exactly what they were going to find. The tower operator responsible for the last communication with the helicopter was a 28-year-old civilian technician, Robert McCall. He wasn't in the military, but had worked at the base for 6 years and was known for his perfectionism. When asked about the last few minutes before the crash, he reported something unusual. He said he heard a background noise on the last transmission, something like a constant metallic vibration, which wasn't coming from the engine or from normal interference. McCall described the sound as low but penetrating, as if it came from inside his head. He asked to hear the recording of the last call, but discovered that the file had been overwritten. Instead of the original audio, there was only an absolute silence of 13 seconds. When he confronted the head of communications, he was removed from his post indefinitely. The next day, his quarters were emptied, and he was never seen on the base again. Some colleagues said he had been transferred to a facility in Belgium. Others said he had been dismissed without explanation. But what really circulated behind the scenes in the tower was stranger. McCall allegedly left a note inside his drawer, in which he wrote, "They heard back." To this day, no one knows exactly what he meant, but for those who were at the base that week, the feeling was clear. Something had heard the helicopter even before it crashed. The rescue team found the wreckage at 6:41 a.m. in a clearing in the dense forest, but the scenario didn't make sense. The helicopter was practically intact, with the fuselage open on the side and the rotor blades twisted. But there was no fire, no explosion marks. No trees had been knocked down in the impact. It was as if the aircraft had been landed violently, or as if it had been put there. 3 bodies were found in the cabin, the pilot, the co-pilot, and a technician. All were buckled up. But a 4th man was missing, the one who, according to the manifest, was responsible for the cargo. The rear door of the aircraft was open, and inside, where there should have been boxes, containers, or lashings, there was only a geometric void, 4 square markings on the metal floor, indicating that something heavy had been removed, but there were no footprints, no drag marks. The onboard radio was fully functional, battery active, but the emergency channel had been cut from the inside. One of the soldiers tried to reactivate the line, but a spark escaped from the panel. And then, for 2 seconds, the radio emitted a sound that was recorded by the team's microphones. When the audio was later analyzed, it revealed something unusual. It wasn't static. It was a rhythmic sequence like beats, only too slow for a human being. Team Alpha 9's arrival on the scene was swift and silent. Made up of soldiers trained in the recovery of sensitive materials, they were all equipped with full protective suits, something unusual for a rescue mission in safe territory. The lead was Lieutenant Ron Hallberg, known for his work in containment operations in contaminated areas, although officially he had never taken part in any mission in Europe. As soon as they surrounded the wreckage, they noticed a strange change in the air. One of the soldiers reported feeling his skin tingle under his uniform. Another said that the surrounding sound seemed muffled, as if the wind had been silenced. The compasses began to spin in error. The thermometer dropped 4 degrees in less than 10 minutes. Hallberg ordered absolute silence. None of them knew what they were looking for, but they all knew that this was no ordinary accident. At the rear end of the fuselage, they found a piece of metal fabric stuck to the ground, as if it had been torn from something bigger. It wasn't part of the helicopter. It was dark, dense, and seemed to emit a slight vibration, perceptible only to the touch. One of the soldiers tried to store the material in an airtight bag, but backed away the moment he touched it. When asked, he simply said, "It's not cold, nor hot. It's as if it had a pulse." Protocol required that all bodies be photographed and removed with documentation, but Alpha 9's records always came back to the same point. The 4th crew member wasn't there. No traces, no blood, no evidence that he had been ejected or removed by animals. The only clue was a loose and intact seatbelt, with the buckle open precisely, as if it had been unfastened from the inside, calmly. The team's initial report mentioned an incomplete footprint in the mud, about 30 meters from the aircraft, but the cast didn't match any of the sizes recorded for the crew members. It was bigger and wider. The soldier who found the mark, Daniels, commented afterwards that it seemed to have been made with weight, but not deep enough for a human foot, as if something had brushed against the ground without actually stepping on it. As they searched their surroundings, they noticed that the birds had disappeared. Nothing could be heard. No animal movements, no natural sounds. And within a radius of 15 meters, the ground had sunk slightly, forming a circle that was imperceptible at first glance. When Lieutenant Hallberg called it a dissipation point, the others didn't understand, but he spoke with an uncomfortable certainty, as if he had seen it before. In Alpha 9's report, the space for describing the returned cargo was blank, literally a blank line between the item condition of the aircraft and condition of the crew. The document was printed, signed, and sealed with a red restricted access stamp. None of the soldiers on the mission were allowed to comment on what they saw, not even among themselves. The verbal protocol included the expression, blind level of communication. But Private Owens, in charge of the visual inventory of the wreckage, drew something in his field notebook that night. A simple outline, a rectangular object with unknown symbols in low relief on the sides. It didn't look like ordinary metal. It was attached by double-locked straps and fitted into a reinforced rubber holder. Apparently, the object had been installed with such care that it made no sense for it to be on an unlisted aircraft. In the margin of the drawing, he wrote a single remark, "Too quiet." When asked what he meant, Owens replied that he got within a meter of the cargo and noticed that the sound of his footsteps disappeared, as if the air around the object absorbed the noise. There was no time to investigate further, because 15 minutes later, they received a new order: evacuate, and to take what was left of the cargo without looking again. During the evacuation, the remains of the cargo were placed in a special box brought in by secondary helicopter, a reinforced structure covered in a flexible lead blanket, unusual for standard use. The presence of this material raised suspicions among the more experienced soldiers, since its use was reserved for materials with a risk of radiation or electromagnetic emissions of unclassified origin. Lieutenant Hallberg sealed the box without exposing the contents for more than 30 seconds. The soldiers present were wearing gloves and visors. Even so, one of them, Simmons, started bleeding from the nose about 4 hours later. The next day, he had dark spots under his skin and blurred vision. He was urgently removed from the base. The official medical diagnosis was internal bleeding due to sudden atmospheric pressure. But everyone knew that the helicopter hadn't even taken off with him. The strangest thing came during the transportation of the box. One of the support helicopter's sensors, responsible for measuring the magnetic field, completely jammed. The hands were spinning wildly throughout the flight. At the moment of landing, the panel registered a negative field reading, something theoretically impossible. The crew didn't talk about it publicly, but the flight operator made a handwritten note in the flight log. The space around the box seemed to want to erase everything. On returning to base, the members of the Alpha 9 were divided into technical quarantine. Each was housed separately, with daily medical and psychological visits. The aim, according to the command, was to monitor possible environmental exposure, but in practice it was containment. None of them had any more contact with each other. None of them heard from Sergeant Ellis, who had led part of the ground inspection. Ellis had entered the wreckage twice. It was he who found the part of the inner panel burnt from the inside, as if something had tried to escape. After the mission, he spent 3 days in absolute silence. When he finally spoke to an officer, he reported hearing voices during the inspection, but not from outside, from inside the metal structure itself. He said he didn't understand the language, but he felt the meaning. It wasn't a threat. It was a summons. 3 days later, Ellis was found unconscious in his bedroom, with the windows locked from the inside. His gun was intact in the closet. The only thing out of place was the wall. He had written something in charcoal directly on the concrete. A symbol, circular with crossed lines in the center, the same shape that was engraved on the side of the object. When asked what it meant, Ellis replied, "I didn't know it was ours." On the morning of the 10th day, the Alpha 9 soldiers were due to be released, but the release never came. Instead, the barracks were sealed from the inside, and a new team arrived at the base, civilians in airtight suits with no visible identification. They brought with them black briefcases, a small generator, and a set of numbered syringes. No soldiers were informed of the new protocols. The official justification: pre-exposure to non-standard technical load. The syringes contained a transparent liquid with a different viscosity to water. After application, 3 soldiers reported extreme drowsiness. One of them, Ramsey, began to speak in a low voice, repeating the same phrase, "He's buried, but he's not dead." The medical team considered it an adverse reaction, but by then, no one was distinguishing between symptoms and signs. Reports were recorded manually, without access to electronic systems. One of the soldiers, desperate, tried to escape from the base. He was intercepted and sedated. When asked why he had fled, he replied, "I dreamt about what's in the box." And in the dream, it was no longer something, it was someone. After that, the barracks were reinforced with metal doors. What had previously been quarantine became confinement. From then on, no one was trying to understand what had happened to the helicopter. They were just trying to contain what it brought. 3 days after the quarantine began, a communications technician personally delivered 2 audio tapes to the base's intelligence officer. They were the recordings extracted from the helicopter's black box. The contents were to be analyzed only by authorized personnel, but what nobody knew was that the technician had made a copy and secretly shared an excerpt with a colleague in the logistics sector. The audio circulated quietly and soon came to the attention of some Alpha 9 soldiers. What the tapes brought back was not what was expected. There were no engine sounds, no cockpit dialogue or alarms. For almost 12 minutes, the only audible sound was a constant, low rumble, like an underground vibration. At 2 points, there were dry cracks, like stones breaking under pressure. But the strangest thing was that, at 8 minutes and 41 seconds, something muttered amidst the noise. It wasn't a word. It was a tone, something that seemed to respond. One of the soldiers who heard it, Martin, collapsed a few hours later. He kept shouting the same word, theta. He was sedated and removed from the base. When his belongings were collected, they found a torn note with just one sentence. They weren't supposed to listen back. After that, the tapes were collected by the civilian team and taken away. No copies remained at the base. Officially, the recordings never existed. When examining one of the fragments taken from the fuselage, the base's chemical laboratory found microscopic inscriptions on one of the helicopter's internal plates, on the side opposite the cargo compartment. They were very fine lines in relief, which were not part of the structural design. The inscriptions resembled a mixture of Cyrillic and Greek characters and ancient pictograms, but no known coding system was able to translate them. A military linguist was hastily summoned from a French base. Specializing in dead languages and ancient dialects, he spent 48 hours analyzing the marks. When he emerged from the laboratory, he was in a state of shock. He said only one thing to the officers present. "It's not a language. It's a impression, a condensed thought pattern." After that, he asked for an indefinite leave of absence and returned to France the same day. The most curious thing is that even after the wreckage was cleared, the marks reappeared in the material collected, as if they were remade on their own. One officer went so far as to say that it was like a living language trying to remain visible. The immediate order was to completely incinerate the fragments. But one of the pieces was separated by one of the civilians for secret transportation. To this day, no one knows where it ended up. In the week following the accident, all transmissions from the base began to show constant noise, especially on the short-range radio bands. The pattern wasn't simple static. It was as if someone or something was trying to infiltrate the frequencies. The noise resembled a rhythmic, almost cardiac pulse, followed by exact 4-second pauses. Curiously, the same frequency appeared even when the devices were disconnected from the power supply. The engineer responsible for diagnosing the problem suggested that the source of the interference was within the base itself, but at no physical point. He said it was like a field, an emission that didn't pass through the air, but through the surrounding space. Equipment began to fail. Radars jammed. Lights flashed for no reason. In some cases, soldiers reported feeling dizzy or pressure in their ears when passing near the containment wing. The High Command's decision was to seal off the underground corridors and disable the internal communication systems. The base once again operated by external signal, with codes exchanged manually and without electronic support. A colonel described the situation in a confidential report as, "We are shielding the base against something that seems to want to communicate, but we don't know with whom or why." During an emergency reorganization of the base's physical archives, a forgotten box was found in a room that had been locked since the 60s. The contents were at first glance bureaucratic: flight reports, outdated maps, emergency protocols. But among the papers, a brown envelope sealed with a red seal bore an almost erased stamp: Theta Class, 1956, permanent interdiction. The internal document described a similar occurrence: the crash of a military aircraft in a safe zone, carrying an object of an undeclared nature. The location was southern Greece during a reconnaissance mission. The reports in the document spoke of a loss of spatial orientation, changes in the perception of time, and a geometric shape in the cargo that caused absolute silence around it. The term used in the text was suppression field. The most shocking part came at the end of the report: a censored passage with black stripes which allowed only part of a sentence to be seen, non-human element, but adapted to the form of land transportation. The existence of this document proved that the current event was not the first. and that someone had known for a long time that this type of cargo would appear again. Based on the information in the 1956 document, the intelligence team informally named the recovered object the Theta Box. This name began to circulate discreetly among the military on the base, not as a formal code, but as a way of referring to what no one wanted to name directly. Every time something strange happened, an electrical fault, unusual behavior, an unidentified sound, they just said, it was Theta. Lieutenant Hallberg, until then resistant to any speculation, began to change his stance. He gathered the remaining Alpha 9 soldiers and said just one sentence, "If anything tries to talk to you, don't answer." No one understood immediately, but the tone with which he said it left no room for jokes. Hallberg had seen something like this before. He just never thought he'd see it again so soon. That same night, someone drew the symbol Thi with their finger on the foggy glass of the communal bathroom. No camera caught the person responsible. The symbol was erased minutes later, but the tension didn't go away. And for the first time since the accident, one of the soldiers woke up screaming, without knowing why. In the dark of the barracks, he kept saying, "She knows I'm here." Two of the soldiers who had taken part in the direct containment of the cargo began to show unusual physical symptoms. The first, Sergeant Rollins, noticed a change in the skin of his hands. Small, almost imperceptible ripples began to appear along his fingers. In a matter of days, the fingerprints had completely disappeared. The second, Private Meeks, completely lost his sense of smell and hearing in his left ear, without any apparent damage. The base's medical team carried out blood tests, but the results were inconclusive. The white blood cells were hyperactive, as if the body was trying to fight something, but there was no fever, infection, or virus. What intrigued the doctors most was the pattern of the changes. They weren't random. The immune response followed a rhythm. It was as if the two soldiers' bodies were reacting to a command, not an invader. Both were isolated immediately, but before being removed, Rollins left a written message on the inside of the barracks metal cabinet. "This is not a contamination, it's an instruction." The phrase was recorded, photographed, and then covered with white paint by the command. But the soldiers who saw it before then began to look at each other with a different kind of fear. A fear that didn't come from what was outside, but from what might be starting inside. The Theta Box had been sealed in 3 layers of containment and stored in an underground compartment lined with lead and special rubber. Even so, the thermal sensors continued to register heat coming from inside the structure. The curious thing was that the heat didn't oscillate. It was constant, like a beat maintained by an energy source that consumed nothing. Even more disturbing was the detection of a slight internal movement. It wasn't vibrating or mechanical. It was a micro-oscillation, as if something inside the box was breathing slowly. The civilian scientists sent by the command analyzed the data and suggested that it could be a pulsed generator. But when they opened the magnetic sensors, the graphs showed a pulsation in binary sequence. That wasn't energy. It was a pattern, an emission. The chief engineer wrote in his report, "We're not just storing this object. We are maintaining contact with something, and we don't know with what." After this observation, he was dismissed from the base on the grounds of saturation due to operational stress. However, 3 days later, he was found dead in his apartment, with the Thi symbol scratched into his chest, as if he had drawn it with his fingernail. The official report concluded suicide, but no one among the soldiers believed this version. As the incomprehensible events increased, the decision was made to remove the Theta Box from its original base. The destination was a facility known only as Echo Base, located in a remote area of Norway, out of reach of commercial satellites and under the direct control of a coalition between the US, West Germany, and a small group of dissident Soviet scientists. The operation was conducted in extreme secrecy. For the transfer, the object was locked in a container reinforced with multiple electromagnetic layers. Transportation was to take place in 3 stages, by air, land, and underground. But on the first leg of the flight, an unofficially recorded event occurred. The pilot reported a sudden total power failure in the cargo helicopter, which was hovering at an altitude of over 3,000 meters. The engines simply stopped and restarted out of nowhere. When they landed at the first stop, the thermal sensors indicated that the box had increased its temperature by almost 5 degrees, even in isolation. This could only mean one thing. It was active during the flight. The operation commander ordered that no further reports be made. The cargo continued to Echo Base, and the existence of the aerial event was erased from the logistical records. At Echo Base, 4 scientists were assigned to study the Theta box: a Norwegian nuclear physicist, a Soviet linguist, a German neuroscientist, and an American cryptographer. None of them had contact with the object at the same time. The tests were carried out in isolated shifts, with no direct exchange of information between the experts. The idea was to avoid contamination of perception. During the first few weeks, the reports were brief and evasive, but then, without any sign of alarm or breach of security, the neuroscientist, Dr. Dieter Klaus, simply disappeared. The security cameras showed him entering the containment room, never leaving. The next recording was blank for 2 minutes. When the image came back, the room was empty and the box was still sealed, untouched. The only clue left by Dieter was a note in his field notebook. "If he's in here, the space isn't the same." After that, the other scientists refused to go in alone. The Soviet linguist suffered a nervous breakdown, saying that the box had started imitating voices that she had only heard as a child. The cryptographer asked for immediate removal. The physicist disappeared from the radar. All the records of her last interactions were sealed, or more likely, they were forcibly removed. After the disappearances, the Theta box was transferred to a new structure within Echo Base itself, an underground room lined with layers of quartz, carbon steel, and absorbent polymer. It was informally called the White Room because it contained nothing but a chair, a camera, and the box in the center. No one else could enter. The tests would be carried out remotely. For the first 72 hours, the box remained inert, but on the morning of the 4th day, the camera caught something strange. A faint shadow appeared on the opposite wall, even without a moving light source. The video was analyzed frame by frame, and in one of the frames, the shadow projected something similar to a human profile, but inverted, as if the image was being formed from the inside out. The scientists who watched the original video signed lifetime confidentiality documents. One of them, in an anonymous letter sent years later, described the moment as, "It was as if it wanted to rehearse the shape of something that was about to come out." From that day on, no new tests were carried out. The White Room was sealed. The box remained untouched for almost 2 decades, but what nobody knew was that it never stopped emitting. In 1992, after a secretive reorganization of American military structures in the post-Cold War era, an order came from a secret committee in the Department of Defense. The Theta box was to be destroyed. The document used the term absolute decoupling and provided for controlled burning in 0 atmosphere, a procedure used only for materials considered field resonance activators. The mission was assigned to Unit 013, which specializes in the disposal of out-of-classification technology. The base chosen for the procedure was an underground facility in Alaska, known only as the Snow Site. There, the protocol called for the use of magnetized plasma to disintegrate any atomic structure in the box, but the procedure was never completed. The moment the ignition process began, all the base's electronic systems failed simultaneously. The team was forced to abort. When the sensors were reconnected, the data indicated that the internal temperature of the box had dropped for the first time in decades. But in contrast, a new line of symbols had appeared on its surface, drawn with what looked like charcoal. They formed a short word: rejected. Before the destruction failed, one last experiment had been tried. A magnetic tape recording would be played next to the box to observe interference in real time. The original tape contained only technical noise, but when it was played backwards, something bizarre happened. The box responded with a high-frequency vibration that altered the magnetic tape itself. When the tape was played again, a new message appeared, in a human, clear male voice. But what was most chilling was the content. The voice said, in halting English, "We are not what is inside. We are what left it behind. After that, there was a dry sound, like metal being slowly bent, and then absolute silence. The original audio was kept in a safe, and only 3 people had access to it. One of those responsible for the recording, Major Thompson, applied for permanent leave for psychological reasons a few days later. In an informal interview with another officer, he confided, "It wasn't listening to us. It was waiting for someone to recognize the message." His request was accepted, and the tape archive, along with the name of the project, was transferred to an untitled section in NATO's top security archives. More than 20 years after the helicopter crash, the investigation into the initial flight was reopened by an independent Air Force agent who was auditing undocumented flights from the 70s. During the analysis, he discovered something unexpected. The registered crew did not match the fingerprints of the bodies identified at the crash site. The medical records of the 3 dead men had been retroactively added to the system years after the event. Even worse, the identity of the supposed 4th crew member, the one responsible for the cargo, was never found. There was no photo, name, or history. The code name was R. Klein, but the acronym didn't match any American military personnel at the time. The investigator tried to access declassified Soviet archives and found something even more disconcerting. In 1957, a defected Ukrainian physicist used the same name, but this man died in a fire in Moscow, or so the official record said. Faced with inconsistencies, the theory most accepted internally became the most uncomfortable. The men in that helicopter were not the ones who should have been there. Someone, or something, had been placed in that crew. And the transport, perhaps it wasn't a simple logistical error. Perhaps it was a courier. In 2003, a team of archaeologists hired to examine preserved forests in Germany happened to find an anomaly in the soil near the area where the helicopter crashed in 1974. A denser layer of earth with metallic residue and signs of extreme heat appeared under the roots, as if something had been emitting constant heat for decades, but there was no buried equipment, nothing visible, just marks. In the center of the ground, they found a flat stone with an engraved symbol, the same F symbol, identical to the one recorded in the case reports. And next to it, a crudely carved inscription in English. "No one is safe when the bearer is not willing." None of the archaeologists could explain what it meant. But curiously, the soil around the stone was completely free of life. No insects, no roots, no moss. A dead circle. Samples from the site were sent for analysis in Munich, but disappeared on the way. The company that had hired the archaeologists cancelled its funding for the project the following month, and weeks later, 2 members of the team left messages online suggesting that they were being followed. The messages suddenly stopped being posted in March 2004. Since then, no one has excavated the area again. Today, the case of the helicopter crash in 1974 does not appear in any public military report. The Alpha 9 soldiers have been dispersed, relocated, or silenced. Those involved in the Theta Box tests have disappeared or been removed for compromised sanity, and the physical archives relating to the event exist only in fragments, each kept in a different base under absolute secrecy. But among some restricted intelligence circles, the name Theta Box still circulates, not as an object, but as a concept, a code to designate events in which the nature of the threat is not outside, but in the process of trying to understand it, because everything indicates that the problem was never what was inside the box, but the fact that someone tried to open it. And in the unofficial archives, in small, almost erased letters, appears the only note that still causes silence in those who read it. The cargo was successfully delivered. What will be done with it is your responsibility.